Good morning. Today's lesson is 6.3. We're going to be estimating fraction sums and differences. Our essential question today, how can you make reasonable estimates of fraction and sums and differences? So we're going to be using estimating today with our fractions. Let's unlock the problem. Kimberly will be riding her bike to the school this year. The distance from her house to the end of the street is 1/6 of a mile. The distance from the end of the street to the school is 3/8 of a mile. About how far is Kimberly's house from school? Well, you can use benchmarks to find a reasonable estimate by rounding the fractions to 0, a half, or 1. So one way, we're going to use the number line. So we're going to estimate 1/6 plus 3/8, and we're going to use the number line. So here's my number line. I'm going to place a point at 1/6 on the number line. So let's do that. So here's 1/6. So the fraction is between 0 and 1/2, right? Because there's my 1/6, and it's between 0 and 1/2, because I'm only using 0, 1/2, and 1, because those are my three benchmarks. So I'm going to write 0 and 1/2. The fraction is closer to the benchmark. Which is it, closer to 0 or closer to a half? If I'm looking at the length from here to here, and the length from here to here, I can with definite say it's closer to 0. So I'm going to round to 0. Okay. Now we're going to place the point 3/8 on the number line. So let's do that. There's 3/8. Okay. So on this one, the fraction is between, again, 0 and 1/2. So I'm going to write 0 and 1/2. The fractions 3/8 is closer to the benchmark. Well, let's look and see. There's 0, and then there's 1/2. So it's definitely closer to 1/2. So we're going to round to 1/2. So we're going to add the rounded fractions. So 1/6 was closer to 0, and 3/8 was closer to 1/2. So if I were to add those together, my answer would be 1/2. So Kimberly's house is about 1/2 mile from the school, because we're estimating. So another way, we're going to use mental math. You can compare the numerator and the denominator to round the fraction and find a reasonable estimate. So I have 9/10 minus 5/8. So step 1, let's round 9/10. Think. The numerator is about the same as the denominator, right? The 9 and 10, they're like only one away, right? So if it's this close to the same, then it's going to be close to a whole number, right? So I'm going to round the fraction 9/10 to 1. Step 2, let's round 5/8. Think. The numerator is about half of the denominator, right? Because if I were to double 5, it would be 10, and that's really close to 8. So I'm going to round the fraction 5/8 to a half, because it's really close to a half. So now I'm going to subtract. 9/10 turned into 1 when I rounded it, and then 5/8 was closer to the benchmark, a half. So so make sure you remember that you're subtracting. So 1 minus a half is about a half. All right, so let's look at this. 2 and 7/8. Well, again, going back to the logic we used before, 7 and 8 are really close in numbers, so I could probably round that up to a 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3, so I'm going to round 2 and 7/8 to 3, minus 2/5. Well, 2 is really not close to the half. It's actually closer to the... When you're looking at it on the number line, it's pretty close to the half, so I would round that to a half. And 3 minus a half is 2.5. Okay, let's look at the next one. 1 and 8/9. Well, again, 8 and 9 are really close in numbers, so I'd round that up to the next number. So 1 and 8/9 would be rounded to 2. And then I'm going to add my plus sign. Again, 8 and 10, 8/10, they're really close together, so I would round that up to the 1 benchmark. So I would have 5, right? And that's going to equal 7. Remember, when I'm rounding, I'm looking at the benchmark 0, 1/2, and 1/2. Those are the three numbers that I'm rounding up to or down to. All right, let's share and show. So 5/6 plus 3/8. So I'm going to round 5/6, and it's closest to the benchmark of 1, right? Because 5 and 6, they're really close together. So I can round that up to 1. 3/8, it's closer to the benchmark of 1/2, because if I were to double 3, it would be 6, and that's really close to 8. So I would say it's closer to the 1/2. So now I'm going to add to find the estimate. So I have 1 plus 1/2, and that equals 1 and 1/2. Okay, so let's do one more. So 5/9. So 5/9 is closest to the 1/2 benchmark, minus 3/8, which is again closest to the 1/2 benchmark. And if I'm subtracting that, I'm going to get 0. All right, I want you to continue on with the rest of the problems on these pages. Work with a partner. You can come with me and work on the carpet. Good luck.